The myth today that we're going to bust is all about these beautiful Phalaenopsis orchids. Now, Phalaenopsis orchids are continuously voted the best houseplant and the most favourite houseplant in the UK, and you can see why. But because of their popularity, they're produced in the millions, which means the price is cheap and people use them almost like a bunch of flowers as disposable things, and they don't have to be. I've got one that I grow at home that I've had for over 16 years, and it flowers every year at least once. I'm going to show you how to get your orchid to flower reliably for years to come, and it's really quite simple. So when the flowers start to die back and fade, like this one here, you want to wait for the rest of the flowers to get just like that, or even start dropping. And then there's a couple of different ways you can do this. You can either cut it back to the first node, after where the flowers are, and that will encourage a second spike, usually a lot smaller, to emerge from there. Or what I like to do is cut it right back to before the first node. What that's going to do is allow the plant to recover, replenish, produce more leaves, and therefore produce more energy. So when the next flowers come, you'll get a much larger and longer lasting bloom. Another thing I like to do with orchids is remove this for when the new bloom emerges, because orchids naturally actually grow more like this, and the flowers spill down and it looks spectacular. So if you have it in a tall pot like this and don't support it, the flower spike will just arch over naturally and they look really, really beautiful. Now, there are some other things apart from trimming the flower spike back to do to keep your orchid happy and healthy. And the first is to repot it. Now, people get a little worried about repotting plants, and especially orchids, but these clear pots make it really easy to tell when it needs to be repotted. So if you look down to the bottom here, you'll see that the substrate, the bark that it grows in, is starting to decompose. Now, orchids naturally grow on trees, so they're used to a lot of airflow around the roots. So when the bark starts to decompose, you get compacted areas which can create rot, and obviously we do not want that to happen. So to start repotting it, literally just tip it out, give it a squeeze, and the substrate will likely come away nice and easy. And just tickle that away from the roots. Just tickle away the substrate, and then that gives you a really clear look at the roots. Now, these roots are really healthy, but there's a few little bits here that we're going to trim off. You'll notice the colour of the roots. So the colour of the roots here that have been on the outside of the pot and above the pot have got a green tinge, and that's because in Phalaenopsis orchids, not only do the leaves photosynthesize, but the roots can too. So we're going to just look at these little bits here and start taking them off. These will never recover. They've gone dry and damaged, and we'll just nip them off. You can see there a really, really healthy plant that's ready to be repotted. And the pot I'm using is the same size as it was in. You don't need to overpot them. You're doing this just to refresh the substrate. The substrate that I'm going to use today is a lot chunkier, so it's going to allow a lot more airflow around the roots, and it's also going to help prevent rot because it'll allow the orchid to dry out much quicker. So the first bark that I've got is a little bit chunkier than the one it was in before. And this is the second. You can see it's much larger in size. To start your repot, you want to put about 1 inch of the substrate into the bottom. And then you can hold your orchid above and really simply just infill around the edges. You can tap as you go just to work that down around the roots. You want to keep these roots that were previously outside as well. You don't need to bury the whole orchid. The clear plastic pots come in really useful here as well, because you can see where the substrate is, and like this, where there's a gap, we can help fill that in. And that's the orchid repotted. The only thing you need to do now is water it thoroughly. The roots on an orchid tell you when it needs watering. The roots underground should go a silvery grey like this when it needs watering, and when it's watered enough, they'll be green like this. So if this hadn't been repotted, it wouldn't be ready for water, but because we have repotted it, it's really important to water the plant in. Orchids are more than happy with tap water, so don't worry about getting distilled water or filtering the water. And to water it best, just water from the top and allow that water to run straight through. Sometimes when I'm in a rush, I'll just fill its display pot with water, pop the orchid in, leave it for 10 minutes, and then make sure you give it a good shake out afterwards to get rid of all this excess water. Now, the best position for an orchid is somewhere bright. Most people like to have it within their home when it's flowering, which is absolutely fine, and with less light, the flowers will probably last a little bit longer. But to get the orchid to grow more leaves and to get it healthy and ready for another flowering, you should move it somewhere bright. So an east or west facing windowsill, a north facing windowsill, or dropped back a couple of meters from a south facing windowsill is perfect. If you can get a little bit of direct sun on its leaves, either early in the morning or in the evening, it's going to be most happy. Pop it in its bright position, and within a few months, you should see the start of a flower spike just emerging under one of the leaves. So as you can see, orchids do not have to be disposable. They're really easy to care for and to get to reflower year after year. Follow those tips and you'll have beautiful orchids around your home for years to come.